Carl Schmitt was a prominent German political theorist and critic of contemporary liberal democracy. Conservative in his beliefs, Schmitt was born in 1888 and died in 1986. He is most famously known for his work, The Concept of the Political, written in 1932, wherein he wrote, and quote, "The specific political distinction to which political actions and motives can be reduced is that between friend and enemy." End quote. Lately, Schmitt has been featured prominently in dissident right circles online, on Substack, Twitter, and various YouTube channels. With the current state of political affairs, specifically the hyper-partisan divisions within the American public, and the growing acceptance amongst these partisans to be willing to use deadly force on political opposition, that I find that Schmitt's criticisms, observations, and writings remain incredibly prescient to this day. But in contemporary discourse, it seems that his association with the Nazi Party of mid-century Germany seems to prevent his work from being appropriately discussed and appreciated in our current political observations. One's associations are typically used as a manner of gatekeeping, a tool of impeachment. Just the first sentence of his Wikipedia page is a good example of that. But with that being said, let's get to the ideas that he's talked about. Schmitt's discussion of the friend-enemy distinction is fundamentally about one's way of life. This distinction is determined to be existential, which is to say that the enemy is whoever, quote, in a specifically intense way, existentially something different and alien, so that in extreme case conflicts with him are possible, end quote. Such an enemy need not even be based on nationality, so long as the conflict is potentially intense enough to become a violent one between political entities. The actual substance of enmity may be anything. Schmitt's work on the friend-enemy distinction, the concept of the sovereign, and rhetorical criticisms of democratic norms have recently made the rounds in various right-wing and reactionary circles. Aaron McIntyre has recently done an excellent video on Schmitt, which I will link in the description. And while Schmitt has been largely ignored on the mainstream right, there are two quotes and concepts of his that I want to take a closer look at today, and examine their application in our current political system, and why his work is still important to look at to this day. Because as this video will attempt to demonstrate, Schmitt got a hell of a lot of things right in today's current political affairs. The first quote is from The Concept of the Political, detailing what Schmitt means by the enemy. Quote, "The political enemy need not be morally evil or aesthetically ugly. He need not appear as an economic competitor, and he may even be advantageous to engage with him in the business transactions. But he is, nevertheless, the other, the stranger, and it is sufficient for his nature that he is, in a specifically intense way, existentially something different and alien, so that in extreme case conflicts with him are possible. These can neither be decided by a previously determined general norm, nor by judgment of a disinterested and therefore neutral third party." End quote. Schmitt's description of the enemy is demonstrative of the current state of political opposition and foes in our current time frame, and it is something that Republicans in the United States have failed to take heed as they allow their foes to trample them even as they work with them. Take Silicon Valley, for instance. It is advantageous for Republicans to work with Silicon Valley, giving them political support they need in the name of H-1B visas and tax breaks, even as Silicon Valley deplatforms and censors even the most milquetoast of Republican personalities, meme accounts, and those who simply follow them. The most recent waves of Twitter bans are demonstrative of this, where posters whose accounts were private and silent for months seemingly disappeared in one fell swoop. And in terms of conflicts that arise from this, you see many on the right are unable to appeal to the judgmental third parties because of the alien nature of Silicon Valley and our current form of liberal government, as they wield unspeakable power in their ability to silence and give voice within the system, but yet can easily hide to the guise of, quote, "It's a private company, and they can do what they want," end quote. These companies are not necessarily morally evil, nor do they believe themselves to be, nor are they aesthetically ugly, and are seen by many as a vital service that is seen by many in the world as a utility at this point, in our world of computer-mediated communication on a global scale. What makes it worse is that their worldview is based on their own presumptive moral superiority in the face of the current system, being able to take advantage of the noble myth of neutrality to assert a position of supremacy, both in morals and consequences. Schmitt's concept of the friend-enemy distinction is more widely understood by the left than it is the right, especially when it comes to how individuals and political actors align and associate with one another. As Schmitt writes, quote, "The utmost degree of association is the willingness to fight and die for and together with other members of one's group, and the ultimate degree of disassociation is the willingness to kill others for the simple reason that they are members of a hostile group." End quote. This is true for the fact that the mainstream right, classical liberals, and others of the intellectual dark web who believe that they can have a discussion fight their speech with better speech, only to have their books banned from publication like Senator Josh Hawley or Brett Weinstein undergo a struggle session from race activists on Clubhouse, or Joe Rogan facing heat from Spotify staff. This fundamental political axiom from Schmitt is something that even my relatively green political self has been saying, that the political left, especially the young, is willing to fight, die, and knock on doors for their beliefs and candidates, whereas right-wing youth will tend to associate more online with their respective communities without actual on-the-ground action. The left's usage of high time preferences and painting of the right as an existential foe and threat is right out of Schmitt's understanding of the friend-enemy distinction. This is why every Republican candidate, no matter how moderate, is a Nazi whose votes on tax cuts will be blood money, or why Mitt Romney was going to put blacks back in chains. The fundamental flaw of the right as an institution, aside from assuming the noble intentions of liberalism as a sacred truth, is the inability to understand that democratic practices is violence by other means, which means being willing to use force and threaten that force to whip out individuals to the polls. Sadly, such a lesson was never learned, and in turn would have simply have the right as we know it institutionally surrendered decades ago, and has become the very outer party mechanism the neo-reactionary movement has correctly identified, being nothing more than progressives driving the speed limit. The second quote from Schmitt that I want to examine today is on the matter of imperialism. Schmitt writes, and quote, "The concept of humanity is especially a useful ideological instrument of imperialist expansion, and in its an ethical humanitarian form, it is a specific vehicle of economic imperialism. Here one is reminded of a somewhat modified expansion of Proudhon's. Whoever invokes humanity wants to cheat. To confiscate the word humanity, to invoke and monopolize such a term, probably has certain incalculable effects, such as denying the enemy the quality of being human and declaring him to be an outlaw of humanity, and a war can thereby be driven to the most extreme inhumanity." End quote. Humanity, human rights, and human dignity, along with other terms deified and mystified for the purposes of direct intervention, has been the rhetorical and political modus operandi for imperialist expansion, specifically for the American empire. It is important to acknowledge that the United States is an imperialist state, as it is the most accurate way to describe a global hegemon with the most military spending in the world, the largest navy which ensures international trade, and has the economic capability to both ensure strategic and economic goals for its diplomatic and military endeavors. But from Wilsonian idealism of making the world safe for democracy, which led to American intervention in the First World War and thus establishing itself as a global power in the wake of waning European monarchies, to the post-World War II language that would be used in terms of expanding America's humanitarian soft power through the Eleanor Roosevelt language of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and to the American government's policy of containment during the Cold War. Even more recently, human rights and democracy have gone hand in hand in the years of neoliberal and neoconservative interventionism. From Reagan in Grenada, Bush in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Obama's pivot to Asia, and now with Biden claiming that America is back after 4 years of relatively quiet and withdrawing interventions, the Western world, now led for the last 70 years by the United States, has made the notion of human rights and humanity to be the way to expand and achieve the liberal concept of universalism. With the normal vanguards of humanity relatively achieved as markets and access to common goods and necessities become ever widely available, humanity must be achieved through other means, the humanity of diversity. It is why NATO has articles about why diversity is being one's greatest strength, why the decriminalization of homosexuality is a front and center PR issue of the American State Department, and why American soft power through the popular culture has Tina Fey and Amy Poehler shitting on Hollywood foreign press executives for not having enough black people in its entourage despite coming from mainly non-black countries. The most extreme inhumanity comes at the cost of eliminating the cultures, ideas, beliefs, and ethics of other peoples, civilizations, and groups. The very attempt to liberate others and garner humanity for whom the cathedral deems to be on the periphery comes at the cost of putting the rest of the world and their views, ideas, and faith on the back burner. Recently, the New Statesman has wrote that Schmitt's rehabilitation in the political discourse is terrifying due to the fact that he was a Nazi scholar, which is why you'll see the American space program do all it can to erase the Nazis that built it up with their own hidden figures. However, there is reason to look back at Schmitt's writings due to their haunting predictions and analysis that are now almost 90 years old. And if these two quotations from his writing tell us anything, it's that his ideas aren't going away anytime soon. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this kind of work, I do want to let you know that I do have a Subscribestar account, and the link is in the description. And I want to thank Dan Normie for being the first contributor. I will have another video out soon, and I'm now recently got a full-time job, so I'll be doing most of my videos and streams during the weekends now. Monday Morning Musings will now be on a premiere on Monday morning around 8 or 9 o'clock, and expect an uptick in video quality as in the coming months I've started taking some classes on my own time for video editing. Until then, share, subscribe, and like the videos, and as always, be prudent. I'll see you all next time.